Hey, so welcome to another live writing discussion on my Facebook author page. I'm Bryan Young, and I've written books and do a lot of nonfiction journalism. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to use the chat room. So, to start, the first couple of questions we had from uh, between last time and this time, um, we got some questions, and I will answer those before we get more in the comments. So the first one, they ask, "What is my favorite part of creating a world?" And there's a lot of favorite parts of creating a world, um, but for me, the the I think my favorite part might just be creating something that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. I really like playing with the expectations of the real world. One of my favorite, the fantasy book that I'm working on revising is probably the most complete world I've ever created. Or complete, not complete. They're all complete worlds, but the most in depth world I've ever created. And part of what I've loved so much about working on that is that it doesn't have to fit the norms that we have in our society today. So uh, there are women in positions of power, and the lead is a woman, and the attitudes from the Middle Ages that we seem to have forced into all of our fantasy. I don't have to be bound or constricted by those, so that I think that's one of my favorite things is to be able to say, like, what would this world look like without the constraints of our world on it? But sometimes it's fun to just kind of cut loose, like this world building that I'm doing has a lot to do with. There's a lot of like saint. The saints are sort of in place of gods in this story, and coming up with all the mythology of the supernatural and the magic system and how the saints work has been a lot of fun. So there's a lot of favorite parts of that, but I think those might be my favorite. The next question we had was, how do I make sure that all the strings are tied up in the end of a story? And is that something I think about in the rough draft, or I come up with it in editing? And I think this is important. I think that people don't often take enough time to think about the end of their story when they're coming up with the beginning. And sometimes that's how you're writing it, right? When I was writing my book in sort of the Stephen King model, where I was sort of just creating a situation and a premise, and then having the characters react in that way. Then it was something that I didn't quite know the end, so that when I came to tie everything together, the closer I got to the end, the more I realized what was important. And then I knew that in revisions I could go back and revise those things. So one of the things you want to do when you're writing is aim toward a target, obviously, right? And the closer you get to that target, the more you know how to adjust your aim. But sometimes when you start a book, you don't know, you've aimed in the general direction of the target, but not necessarily the bullseye. But say you get 3 chapters from the end, you know exactly what that bullseye looks like, so that you can. But so you have to go back to the beginning and readjust your aim from the beginning. It's something I'm always worried about, and it's something that's always getting revised. It's something that's always getting revised as I'm going, but it's definitely something that I have to go back to the beginning and fix when I reach the end. Because sometimes the ending will surprise me. Sometimes I'll have an ending plotted and know how exactly all of the themes and characters are tying into that ending, and then it surprises me. And something just a little bit different happens, and when I do that, I need to go back and revise the beginning. The book I'm drafting now is interesting in that the book I'm drafting now, I wrote the beginning, and then cut it because I didn't think it fit. And I found a more interesting place to start. And then I realized about halfway through that I needed all that context from the beginning, and sort of pulled a Casablanca where I built up to what had happened before and then showed you what happened before. And because that was the first thing I wrote, I just sort of, so I could get through, I copied and pasted it into that spot. And I know there's a lot of things I need to change about it, but I have a rule not to revise until after a draft is done. So I know that that beginning needs so much work to figure out to the new way I've come about the ending that changed in the entire time that I've been outlining. So hopefully that answers that question. Now, we've got a question in the chat room here, and feel free to ask questions in the chat room. Is there such a thing as a real final product? Now, I'm a big believer in, George Lucas has a quote where he says, and this applies to movies, but I think it applies to books too, a movie is never finished, it's merely abandoned. I think that you could work on a manuscript endlessly, but you have to take it to a point where you feel happy enough with it, but more importantly, that an editor feels happy with it and comfortable enough to put it out. Because once you've been through a product so many times, I guarantee you're going to lose objectivity, and you're going to get caught up and hung up on little things that don't actually matter. You're going to be re-choosing the colors of the drapes in the background to the point where you're not actually making the book better, or the movie better, or the whatever product that you're doing. You're not making it better, you're making it different. And once you've hit that point, you should be stopping, and you should allow someone else to put that out. But if you are making substantive changes, then that's something else. Then maybe you need to be making those substantive changes. But like I said, if you're just arguing over word choice for colors and things like that, it's time to hang it up. I think it was Picasso who said that you need to get to the point where you think you're finished with the painting or the work of art, and then stop 3 steps before that. I think that there's something to that, definitely. And to be honest, I hate going back and looking at the books that I've written previously, because after about a year I realize how much more I've grown as a writer, that I don't like going back and looking at them, because I'm a different writer now. Like, I look back at Lost at the Con, which is the first novel I had published, and I'm not quite sure I know the me that wrote it. I would not sit down now and try to write a book like that again. And then as I read it, or have gone through it, or people have reminded me of things that are in it, I have to ask myself, like, I would totally do that differently now. So I think that there's something to needing to finish a book and leave that as a document for the writer that you were at the time that you wrote it, if that makes any sense. That you can't go back and fix the past or change who you were as a writer when you wrote a particular story. You're the writer you are now, and going back and obsessing about the writer you were yesterday, unless you're in an actual revision process for an editor, I don't think that that's necessarily worthwhile. But that's just me, and everybody has a different way of doing things, and everything I do and say should be taken with a grain of salt. So if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat room here. As far as I go, you can find my books on Amazon. My writing website is bryanyoungfiction.com. If you want signed copies of books, you can get them on the shop there on the website. And the website keeps a pretty good track of sort of written writing advice that I've been putting out over time. And also, it has the shop, but it also keeps track of all the new pieces that I have coming out. So my last post on the blog was breaking down the last scene from Charlie Chaplin's City Lights and what made that great as a piece of art and a piece of storytelling. And I do those, maybe I try to hit one of those once a month, to break down why the scenes are great. And I think part of the reason it's hard to do that is because I want to provide the scene for you, so finding them on YouTube can be hard sometimes. And then if you have any questions for me, you can reach me on Twitter. My handle's at Swankmotron, and I'll answer questions there. And I'm going to try to do this every Friday, as often as I can when I'm not out of town, just to answer questions for people about writing. And yeah, don't hesitate to ask me questions in the meantime between videos as well, because I'll collect them and answer them, and we'll have a great time. But in the meantime, thanks for watching this, and keep writing, and I hope you pick up some of my books and listen to my podcast, and me yak about writing and writing in general. So with that, like I said, keep writing.